I wrote the book. Now, before I start with this video, I would like to say the following. I'm not using the internet since yesterday, and I know how degenerate people can be. So if you have a problem with me, feel free to hit me up on Discord. I even have a channel dedicated for you to insult me. You can insult or expose me however you want to there. I'm not gonna delete any of it. That being said, well, since this is my book, you could technically say that this video is one glorified ad, and you would be right. But regardless, I would like to talk about what I wrote in my book. The book itself is available in German and English. The German version is roughly 20 pages longer, but has the exact same content, narrative, and way of speaking. The reason why it's significantly longer is because of the way the German language works. Bias, for example, translates into Voreingenommenheit, so you get the idea. I also provided a free version of my book on my Discord channel, which contains roughly 50 to 60% of the book. I deliberately cut the chapters short though and provided an insight on multiple chapters instead, so you get an idea of the topics and the content. If you have any criticism or suggestions related to the book, you can either hit me up on my Discord, on the right channel, or you could do it in the comment section under this video. This does include the price, which is $8.99, and considering for how much books usually go, I would say this is a fair price, especially considering the fact that I provided a generous insight on my book, so you don't accidentally buy something you wouldn't enjoy reading. So what is the book about? I will give you a general overview without going too deep into what I wrote, since that would spoil the idea of advertising it in the first place. However, this is the table of contents. Since this is a criticism of postmodern European values, I started the topic with what European actually is. Now you might say that this is clear, but plot twist, it's not. Especially people outside of Europe have this bizarre idea that Europeans have like a common culture and identity, when in actuality Greek and Turkish culture is pretty much indistinguishable from each other aside from religion and language. Greeks, however, have nothing in common with the French. They are pretty much Orthodox Turks and Turks Muslim Greeks. Yet this is not something people will agree or hear often. The Ottomans had some lasting effects on the Balkans that are still visible to this day. Balkanians look like each other because of the nature the Ottoman governed the area. To begin with, the word Balkan itself is of Turkish origin that is nowadays used as a term to identify a group of people. We could also talk about the geographic definition, which is quite arbitrary, with Cyprus being European, or how parts of Kazakhstan and with it certain Kazakhs with deep roots in Asia are somehow European, because why not? And funny enough, defining Cyprus as European would arguably also make Australia European, since it's pretty much the same situation. Yet of course the Kazakhs can't be European, because why would they? But Bulgarians with Asian roots or Hungarians with Asian roots are. 1 millennium of Turkish European interaction, and people still believe that Turks are so foreign to being European that accepting Turkey into the European Union would destroy the meaning of what European actually is. According to these smooth brains, we should probably also get rid of Arabic numbers, or Tolpis, or coffee, or the croissant, or the Dorkeda United Football Club, cause screw them. How dare they have Islamic symbols in their emblem? No Muslimism is allowed on European soil, which is why countries like Albania, Bosnia, or Kosovo don't exist. That's a conspiracy by the Islamic world. You get the idea of the first chapter. Disclaimer, I didn't write my book in the way I present it here, but the content is what I'm presenting here. I'm going into much more detail in the book, and obviously in a much more mature way. I'm being rude for entertainment purposes here. Now, the second and the third chapter is like the actual criticism. There's a red line in this chapter, but I'm deviating from it without going too off track. The intention is not to explain a certain narrative, but to let the reader decide for himself, herself, what the answer to various topics in question can or should be. That's deliberately done by myself, not because I personally couldn't give an answer I believe in, but because I want people to decide for themselves. For that purpose, I start the chapter with pointing at the superiority complex certain Europeans have that I personally noted. For instance, people are quick to tell us filthy Middle Eastern what we should be doing in our country, what we have to do in which way, and by what time. This is obviously not a narrative the general population in Europe takes, but a narrative that you will notice once in a while, especially in more academic circles. And it's not just a superiority complex towards what non-Europeans should be doing, but also in the way how topics are treated. For instance, if I happen to be a famous Almanji in Germany and I were publicly call the Chancellor a pigfucker and a Nazi lover and laugh about it, I'm sure there would be many people questioning whether or not integration was successful in Germany. Yet when the contrary happens and the German insults the Turkish president, then it's something we should all respect, because why not? So insulting and slandering the bad guys is fine, but God protect us from the contrary. Now, some might say, sure, maybe fair point, but who cares? Like, no one got hurt, maybe we have some salty people here and there, but at the end of the day, this is such a petty and meaningless topic. I would even agree to that, but it doesn't stop at meaningless topics. European countries partake in bombing non European countries into oblivion without any consequences. Ramstein is used as a drone base in order to mass murder civilians in the Islamic world by the US. We're talking about blowing up entire weddings. Now, as a die-hard US supporter, you might say, well, it's collateral damage, it's war, it can happen. Alright, but imagine Turkey does the same, and every 10 or so years, some 50,000 Scandinavian civilians die due to Turkey's war against terrorism. Would we treat the topic the same way? Would we accept it the same way we do with the US? The answer to me is a clear no. I don't think people would do. I believe people would be calling for a war against Turkey. So, as a Turk, what should I be calling this? Racism? Fascism? Unintended racism? Like you're supporting the mass murdering of my people for counter-terrorism and you are prohibiting the same from my country. It doesn't come to a surprise afterwards why certain nations feel confident in war. Why are we surprised about Russia? Sure, what they are doing is messed up, but it's not more messed up than what the West is doing for decades now. So who is going to sanction Western atrocities, violations and acts of aggressions? Who is going to stop the tyranny of the West? I'm being harsh with my words in my book about the West because the West has every means to be much better than what they are right now. Yet we see how the West is tearing the construct apart it created in the first place. We live in an age of peace, but for how long when Western nations can bomb the living F of a country, call it a day, move back to their daily lives without anyone facing any consequences? Again, you get the idea of the chapter. I'm scratching on way more topics and questions, but I think I already provided an idea of what you can expect. The fourth chapter is more fun than criticism and the prophecy. It's basically this video, and since this video already covered more or less the chapter, I'm not gonna repeat anything here. All I would like to add here is it still belongs to criticism since ideologies like capitalism are European/Western constructs. Obviously, we can't tell other nations what state doctrine they can or can't have, but that leaves us with a big problem. Imagine every African country wants to create as much emissions as Germany. Whether the Western world likes it or not, their economic systems are role models for developing countries, and unless we want to destroy our planet and humanity with it, especially Western countries have to think about sustainable energy and sustainable green economic systems. This chapter, on the other hand, is clarifications since I felt like I had to explain myself why I wrote certain topics and certain things. For instance, I have roughly 20 pages dedicated to what European is, but I personally couldn't care less if you consider me or my people or yourself as Asian, African, Australian, Martian, or Plutonians. I just don't care about what you want to identify my people or yourself with. It's just bizarre to me that people think being white or European is a personality trait. You ain't smarter just because you're white or European. I feel like we should be past that point 70 years ago. Lastly, my book is not intended to justify Turkey or my ideology, my worldview, or my lifestyle. People are quick to judge other people and their ideologies, and all I want here is just one thing: for people to listen.